Hello, admins. It's your guest host, Josh Birk here. Today, I'm going to welcome Jagan Padmanabhan to talk about some very specific things about security, specifically quirks in security that can sometimes be a little difficult to detect and how we're going to help you detect them. So without further ado, let's go to Jagan. All right, today on the show, we welcome Jagan. Did I do that right, Jagan?
Yes.
All right. We're going to talk about some very interesting security things, but first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you once again for having me.
Thanks. All right. Well, let's start once again in some of your early years. How did you originally get into computing?
Oh yeah, so back then, during school days, we used to play Counter Strike. We have in-house a network connected with a group of friends. So
Nice.
that is how we started into it. We started in a playful mode, and then we slowly started programming and all those aspects to it.
Did you actually get into like modding Half-Life and all that stuff?
Not really.
Got it. Nice. How did you originally get involved with Salesforce?
Yeah, Salesforce. I was part of. I mean, initially I got trained in the Java platform, and then back then we got a new project on Salesforce, and we have been asked, like, if we could try this out. And then I initially thought of giving it a try. I initially thought Salesforce is purely like, sales driven or some sort of MBA related work, but that is how it was. And then slowly I got into it. It was quite interesting. And then back then it was even more interesting without Trailhead. We had a lot of learnings. We used to post in developer forums. It was quite challenging and interesting.
Yeah.
From that point of time, there's no looking back. Like, we just love this platform.
Nice. How did you find the transition from like Java to Apex?
So I was able to correlate most of our things through the basic modules. I usually compare Java related world with Salesforce Apex related, so that it was easy for me during the transition phase.
Got it. And how would you describe your current job?
Yeah, so current job is more of a technical architect, part of customer success group. Work with different set of customers. Each customers have their own set of challenges and problems to be solved. So right now I'm even focusing on the data cloud related piece of it. Try to stitch in the data from multiple data sources what customer is having. They have a lot of silos data across the platform. We are using the power of data cloud to bring in and harmonize all those data.
Got it. I feel like that's a very common thing at the company right now. So, welcome to the club. Are you finding, just as on that topic itself, like especially when it comes to admins, are you finding any particular specific challenges that run into when they start adopting a data cloud?
Our data cloud, the best part is we at Salesforce, we have a template called Data Cloud Workbook Template, which is mainly recommended for all the admins and then whoever is trying to configure data cloud. So data cloud, what we have seen so far is 60 to 70% of time we need to spend on understanding what needs to be done.
Okay.
Like what objects we're going to map, what are the data sources we're going to map. So we have a pretty good decent template out there called Data Cloud Workbook Template, which is highly recommended for our customers so that they spend a lot of time on what needs to be done, what fields needs to be mapped, what should be the data sources. So once we have that in place, admin life looks even more simple.
Got it. Nice. And I think I'm going to ask this in the right way because I believe I don't know the answer. But since we're talking about security today, does Data Cloud offer any new thoughts on what to be concerned with security, or does it just kind of bolt itself on the platform and the platform is taking care of security like it normally would?
Yes, so Data Cloud currently supports data spaces. We have this concept called data space filters through which we can set up the security of it so that authorized users can access a particular set of data instead of accessing all the Data Cloud data.
Got it. Before we get into some of the specifics, are there, when you first start talking to clients and customers, are there very common security issues that you find people aren't concerned about that or aren't aware of that they should be aware of?
Yeah, so the main concerns or challenges what customer was facing right now is down the line Salesforce org, a lot of consulting companies work for them, and then they have tons of changes made on the profiles and the permissions, and then someone got access to something which they are not supposed to. For example, I have seen customers some orgs, they have a lot of sales users have export report function permissions, and customer is thinking about like, do they really need those export reports permission? Definitely not. Only a subset of users need that. So it is all about backtracking and trying to find out how did they got this permission. Do we really need to give this user a permission to those reports? That is one of the
Right.
challenges there.
Nice. It's amazing how many of the security issues really can be boiled down to the concept of least privilege.
Oh yeah, like there are a lot of things happening around the permissions, and then recently we also rolled out object permissions and permission sets. For example, how the particular permission got assigned to the particular user. Is it through profiles or a permission set? So we have all those enhancements as part of recent releases too.
Right, right. Okay, now today we're going to talk about a very specific one, and I'm gonna give you credit because I had not heard of this. Although I think I was kind of aware of the concept. I swear back from my like IoT days. But we're going to talk about what a guest user anomaly is. So let's start at the beginning. Define that for me. What is a guest user anomaly?
Yeah. So this guest user anomaly, before we talk about it, in the last podcast, we discussed about event monitoring in general, like what are the events we have as part of event monitoring. For the listeners, to give a quick background, event monitoring is a subscription based queue we have. The beauty of our Salesforce platform is everything is built on top of event driven architecture, right from the user logs in, logs out, when the user accesses the list views or reports, all those are captured as events at the backend. So when it comes to threat detection is one of the sub module of the event monitoring, which comes at free of cost. If customer has event monitoring, then they would be able to use threat detection at free of cost. So threat detection has a lot of events built into it, and one of the event is a guest user anomaly event, right? So guest user anomaly is one of the interesting event because there are a lot of customers who are using guest users in their communities, or and back then they used to have a force.com site. So they have built a business process surrounding guest user. So here at Salesforce, what we thought is why can't we build a guest user anomaly event so that customers would be able to identify if there is any threat around the guest user.
Okay. What sort of traffic is the threat detector picking up that says this is a guest user and then this is a guest user anomaly?
So behind the scenes, we have a lot of machine learning methods through which we constantly understand the profile of a guest user, what they are supposed to access, and there are a lot of parameters at the back end, which is quite black box for the customer, which is totally handled at the product side. So at the higher level, we use as a machine learning algorithm to detect if there are any information which the guest user is not supposed to access to, but due to some different options, if the guest user is able to access it, then we are throwing that as a guest user anomaly events to our customers.
So go down one more level to that for me, because I was interesting that so I've set up a guest user. I expect him to have this set of least privileges, but you're saying there might be some things that I did in setup that would cause an unexpected ability to access data. Is that what the anomaly is?
Yeah, for an example, right, to deep dive into it, let's say we have Lightning community which is running on a guest user mode, and then behind the scenes, it all starts with the OWD settings, right? So our recommendation for a default external access is a public read, or some customers might have a public read, right? It depends on the business use cases, right? Let's say if there is any suspicion even caused by a guest user, for example, if there is a Apex class which runs in a without sharing mode, for an example, and then if that guest user through some ways, if they are able to get the data which they are not supposed to get, so in this scenario in general guest users should not have access to the objects. So but in a worst case, if something happens and if there is any Apex class without sharing, if they're able to get some information out of it, so it is like inadvertently permitting the guest user to access some data which they are not supposed to, right?
Got it. So it's nothing necessarily that the admin would see from a setup point of view when it comes to, inspecting profiles or permission sets or anything like that, but it would be access to it's et cetera, something else like an Apex class. And then how that was designed is giving them access to something that's outside of their profile.
Exactly. From the admin standpoint, what we recommend is whatever list views which are getting shared, make sure it is getting shared only with a certain set of groups which are set to private. That is one recommendation what we could say to our customers. And then the next one is make sure to do a proper analysis on all the sharing rules we have. Do we have any sharing rules which is sharing with any site guest user? That is one option we would recommend.
What are some inherent risks here? Is it simply access to data that they shouldn't have, or can it get more nefarious than that?
So let's say like if that guest user is not supposed to access the data what they should have, then what happens at the background? It is technically turned. It could lead to a data breach in the near future, right? Because there could be some guest user, there could be some data Apex class which runs in a without sharing mode. It gives for example, it gives a view all data of all the accounts. Then the guest user would get all the accounts. Then that eventually turned out to be a data breach.
Got it. In reference to these tools, let's assume an admin doesn't have, they're not familiar with it. What does it look like? Like, is this a report that they're going to run from time to time? Is this an app that's going to alert them that maybe something is wrong? Like, what's the human user interface here that's letting them know that there's a red flag?
So it all starts with a permission. So there is a permission called view threat detection event. So once that permission get assigned to us through a permission set, then we will get access to a threat detection app. So a threat detection app, once you navigate to a threat detection app, we should be able to see the list of anomalies. For example, if there is any guest user anomaly happens, then we will see a record on the threat detection says guest user anomaly event. Then it is up to customer to take up a decision. Like if they really think it's a threat, or else if they think it's not a threat, they can provide a feedback back to Salesforce.
Got it. So it is kind of a constant monitoring, taking action when they feel like that was definitely a set of data that this person shouldn't be able to have access to.
Exactly. So in addition to it, we are also giving customers option to build a transaction security policy as well. Transaction security policy is something like it is automatically monitoring the threats. For example, guest user anomaly is one event, right? So we have an anomaly event called report anomaly event. For example, user is every day logging in on a particular time interval and they are working on the reports. But suddenly, if the user works over the weekend, or suddenly if the user tries to connect from a different VPN network altogether, and if that particular user is trying to export a report, if that report count is more than 10 million rows, for an example, then Salesforce can throw that as an anomaly event, and then customer can take up an action. If they really feel it's a threat, then they can block it, or else they can add it in some audit log for their purposes.
Got it. Without going into too much detail, what are some of the other events that the threat detector is monitoring?
One of the event is a session hijacking event. This is more of a customer-focused attack event. For example, if any attacker is trying to steal information from using client access to their web application, then through session hijacking event, we would be able to identify if the attacker tries to hijack the client session by obtaining some session token.
Got it. How about APIs?
Yeah, so API, that is super important. Thanks for bringing that up. So behind the scenes, what we do is once we have this streaming and storage enabled for API anomaly, like let's say there's an integration user who periodically runs the APIs and then they get them data out for a business processes. But suddenly, out of nowhere, if the integration user is trying to export more than X number of records, or else the way the integration user is pulling the data, for example, the row count might be new, or else they might be logging in from a different IP address or some sort of anomalies. So what Salesforce does at the back end is it constantly understand the pattern of how that API user is being used for all the API requests. And if Salesforce thinks like the new request is quite different from the existing request in the past, then Salesforce will throw us as an anomaly.
Got it. So kind of at a high level, right? Because like if we look at the session hijacking, that's where I steal your cookie, for lack of a better term. I steal your session ID. I hijack your identity. I try to access Salesforce as you. That would be something very difficult for somebody, a human on the Salesforce side, to detect. Well, that's not Jagan, that's Josh. With the APIs, it's sort of similar. It looks like somebody knocking on the door, and the fact that they are doing something once that door is open that's anomalous is not something easy for a detect. And then finally going back to the guest user. So at a high level, the threat detector is giving us this machine learning eyeball into what the traffic is coming in, coming out, and saying, hey, that thing doesn't it's kind of like, when you get the fraud alerts, right? It's like you don't normally buy $300 worth of goods in Ohio. Like, like maybe you should call us before we spend $300. But it gives us this suite of tools to be able to do that kind of investigation.
Yeah, perfect. Exactly.
Nice. Where can people learn more?
Oh yeah, so we have a help article which we'll be adding it in the podcast as well. That help
Okay.
article talks about threat detection and how the machine learning algorithm at higher level works, and how customers can proactively build a transaction security policy on top of it to play around with the threat detections.
Nice. And once again, this isn't a license add-on. It's on a SKU. It's once somebody turns on the permission set, they're good to go.
Yes, exactly.
Very nice. In general, do you have any security resources that you'd like to share?
Oh yeah, so in general,
Yeah.
we will. I will add that as well.
Okay, perfect. Well, Jagan, thank you so much for the great conversation information. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joshua, for having me again.
I want to thank Jagan for the great conversation information. And as always, I want to thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about this podcast, head on over to admin.salesforce.com. And of course, you can subscribe to it in the podcast client of your choice. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I'll talk to you soon.